What's good, everybody? My guest today is Brett Cavanagh, President of TempWorks Software, which is a staffing software provider that develops customized solutions from the ground up to address staffing needs. Brett, welcome to the Goats of Growth.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about TempWorks and your role there and, who you help.
Yeah. So TempWorks is, you hit it, a staffing software provider. So we've built ATS, a CRM, Paybill, and then all the ancillary products that go with it: electronic onboarding, applications, job board, timekeeping. We've built, designed, and supported all of those in-house. It's solely for staffing. We've had, corporate America reach out, like Target Corp, to say, hey, can we utilize your ATS? They can, of course, but there'd be pieces of the software that just wouldn't be beneficial to them. The benefit for us is that our systems are integrated all the way through. So for those in staffing, it's really, really easy for a user to log in and see what's going on in sales, what's going on in recruiting, all the way through in assignments and invoicing. So it's a nice one-stop shop. My path here was 12 years in staffing myself before coming to TempWorks. I worked for a large company, Aerotech. I recruited and sold in my hometown, Chicago, and then ran some offices up in Canada. And my journey, naturally brought me to software. I always wanted to sell it. My joke to people when I talk to them is when I was coming out of college, the sexy thing, if you will, was pharma sales, and it was med sales. Software seems to be the thing nowadays. So providing for a family of 5, I was like, let's give this software thing a shot. And it was a perfect fit. We service the staffing industry. And I worked my way up to where I'm at today. As president, I oversee both of our companies. So we've got TempWorks Software, which is the tools, if you will, and then Lone Oak Payroll is the servicing agent. So if you need payroll support, tax support, factoring support, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point, that group does all the servicing for our customers in those arenas.
When you're the president of 2 companies, what does that mean? In other words, do you have the same direct reports reporting into you from 2 different companies? In other words, you have a C-level of this person and a C-level of this person within 2 different companies and directors and all that? Or what does it look like organizationally?
A great question. So we have both to the way that you frame that question. So our C-suite sits over both companies.
Okay.
We're small. We do about $55 million a year in revenue. We have 200 employees. So 10 years down the road, maybe it's 2 completely separate structures, reports up through an ownership group, whatever that looks like. But today, the structure is C-suite sits over both. We have account management teams for TempWorks. We have account management teams for Lone Oak. We have sales teams for TempWorks, sales teams for Lone Oak. The reason there is it's different selling a product than it is a service. It's different supporting a product than it is a service. And we feel in our industry and the industry that we support, staffing, how fast it goes to have people who have walked in your shoes before, it's critically important. So we do have about 55-ish employees who are solely Lone Oak Payroll. That's all they do. But all of the Lone Oak Payroll users and customers use the TempWorks software. So your lion's share of employees are going to be at tempworks.com, if that makes sense.
Yep. Got it.
So it is operated as one big company, one big family internally, and then externally it views and feels like 2. And that's intentional and by design.
Yeah, that answers my next question, which was going to be culture in terms of how you're integrating and aligning cultures. But it sounds like it's one culture for all. Is that correct?
One building, one office space, one vision, mission, value system that we all abide by.
Got it. Thank you for that. It's only been 4 years, I believe, right? Or maybe a little over 4 years since you started there. And you started off, I believe, as a sales manager. And here you are now, president of a 200-person company. Many people listening to this would say, wow, right? I'm saying, wow, like that's, and envious. How did you make that transition so quickly?
Do you want the jokey answer? Or
Yeah, give me both.
blackmail, right? Bad pictures. And um, no, Aerotech was wonderful. The learning, the resources, the exposure that I got there was all world. A couple of principles that you and I talked about last time we met were forged and shaped or reinforced with the values that I grew up through Aerotech. So that's a $7 billion, 7,000 person organization that I had 12 years of work with. I held a pretty large role that selfishly, Jay, I wanted to come straight here into the VP of sales role. And our ownership group felt it was important for me to learn software, felt it was important for me to learn our software. And I really am thankful for that. So the original plan was for me to take over. I think the speed and the pace in which things happen for me is because of my experiences at Aerotech, coupled with my personality, coupled with opportunity. We had some changes. I am assertive. I'm aggressive. I see a problem, find a solution, and kind of ask for forgiveness later. And in my case, everything that we were putting in was working, and the ownership group recognized that, so they elevated me quickly. That's the real play-by-play.
I love that. I have two follow-up questions, which is what would you have taken for granted about learning software that in retrospect you were like, man, I'm glad I learned that. No wonder why they wanted to put me in this role. And I'll get to the second question after.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I think out of the gate, it's ego, right? It's, man, I was a top producer. My offices did great at Aerotech. I had all of this experience. I know how to sell. I know how to manage. I don't need to go in to do this learn from the ground up situation. So at least for me, right out of the gate, it's ego. What I took for granted was, do I know staffing? Yes. Do I know the systems that Aerotech used? Absolutely. Do I know our tools here at TempWorks? No way. And I think if I didn't take that year to sell it and really learn it, I'd have a harder time now than I do. So that I think is a big play. Our customer set is big. So first job out of college is Aerotech. I'm 22 years old. That's all I know. That's all my professional life. So I just assumed that every staffing company operated the way that we did. When I'm selling and I'm traveling and I'm going to meet the customers face to face and seeing how they operate, oh boy, was that lens changed fast. So that was a huge benefit that I probably would have taken for granted if I just jumped right in.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned assertive. Give me an example of something, I don't know, whether it was early on or throughout the, certainly early years anyways, at TempWorks where you made a decision, you acted, and you had to apologize, or maybe not even apologize, but just sort of be recognized for that assertive decision that you made.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I could think of. So, we have standard operating procedures. We have an employee handbook. We have a way in which we're supposed to go about doing things. Um, my sales style is transparency, direct candor. And I think sometimes the software industry gets you into a spot of a buyer is asking if you have something or you're developing something. We have a roadmap. I know that we're developing something. I could simply say yes to that question. And I could lead them down a path that they either hear me say that, yes, we have it now, or yes, it's coming soon. And then they want to buy it under that guise. They come in, they go through implementation, they're frustrated because we don't, or it's not anywhere near done or in production yet. And it's not that we were guided to like mislead people. It was that show what we have, answer what is told to you, and try and close the deal. For me, it's, hey, I spent 12 years doing this. Where you guys are going as a company, here's what I'm seeing as drawbacks for our software. Here's what I'm seeing as benefits to our software. And it was just full and utter transparency around what we have. And if they're wanting a feature or they're wanting a product, I can think of a very specific example of somebody who wanted our app to perform in a way in which it didn't at the time. It would have been easy for me to say, yes, we're developing that, because we were. The reality is it took us about 2.5 years to finish it. The selling feature to that customer was we didn't overpromise, and we told them exactly where we're at, and we asked them if they want to be involved in betaing or alphaing the product, and then they're the first adopter and user of it. So not only were they happy with the fact that we were honest, but they were integral in our ability to create and expand on it. And that's a small example. There's bigger things like interview changes and putting in metrics that we never had before, and high levels of accountability that didn't exist in the company before I came here, at least to the depth that it is now. But I think those types of things were the big trendsetters for me out of the gate. That said, I hear ya, I know how you've been doing it, but that doesn't work with my style. So I'm going to do it my way. And if it doesn't work, I'll go up in flames. And if it does work, people are going to ask how I'm doing it, and they'll follow along. And the latter is what happened.
Did anything go up in flames?
In flames, no. Did it crumble a little bit and we have to go backwards a couple of steps? Yes. I'm sure you'll ask what happened. An example of that I could think of is when I moved into marketing or helped with the marketing team. So I shifted from selling to leading sales to then leading anything revenue based. We had some strategies that, how can I say this? I didn't necessarily think were reflective of who we were as a company. They're just dated. Nothing that was overselling and under-delivering is actually quite the opposite. So we went forward and we hired a marketing consultant, and they did an awesome job for us, but we were not ready for them yet. So it was a lot of money spent that we probably didn't capitalize on. We still have the information. We could still work on it later when we're ready to deploy it. But that was me a little bit cart in front of horse, and it cost us 6 figures that I wish I had back.
Interesting. Yep, I've been there before. Why weren't you ready for it? What needed to be in place from your side in order to be ready for it?
We either needed to lean all the way into the consultant and have them do all of the content writing and creation for us, or we needed to hire about 4 more people because we just couldn't put that work out. So they helped create a schedule for us that we're now 2 years in on, and we're only 4 months in on the schedule. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So we just didn't have the staff to put out the work that we wanted to. Our marketing staff is doing an unbelievable job putting out what they're putting out. We probably, in retrospect, should have waited a while before we brought that firm in.
Do you see that ever? Coming to that vision coming to finalization or fruition? Where, in other words, that investment, you finally do see the return, and if so, what's the path to get there?
Yeah, we're actually in the middle of it right now. Our marketing team is expanding. We're going to be re-engaging with that firm, and we're updating a lot of our social content and then our website content for both companies. So we're ready now, I guess. Got it. How it finalizes, I'll let you judge that later.
Well, you can come back here and we can talk about it, right?
Sure. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. I love that.
Let me just go back a little bit here and talk about that learning experience or that learning curve selling the software. And you talked about learning and understanding that, there are many companies that operate differently from Aerotech, right? And that you needed to learn that and how they actually thought about the world and bought and all that stuff. As it pertains to the sales process in engaging with customers. What did you learn or did you find that was different in terms of, I don't know, messaging, delivery? I understand your core tenets, of course, of never, under promise and over deliver, but give me a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah. So I'll reverse it back even further for myself. Selling staffing is a lot of right place, right time. You hear that cliche a lot with sales. And I think that exists in anything.
Mm-hmm.
But in staffing, if they're using a vendor already, this is, let's call it ABC Warehouses, using a vendor already, and they're just not filling enough positions. The way the employer market is today, your average warehouse went from using one, two, maybe three staffing companies on exclusive rights to 30 because they didn't care. They just needed people in the building to get it done. So your sales cycle in staffing could be a day, right? Your bigger deals are probably a couple of months or a couple of years, but it was fast.
Mm-hmm.
Software is slow, as it should be. These are big purchases. These are huge tools that then become major disruptions for these companies. So recognizing the difference between a buyer who is ready and a buyer who is evaluating the market was very critical. And that's not really an experience that I had in droves at Aerotech or just in general. So you've got to figure out what type of buyer are you dealing with. And I'm not going to go to the elementary states of, are you talking to the key decision maker or are you reviewing their contract terms? Like all of that stuff aside, you still have people who just want to see what's out there from a software perspective to confirm that they're possibly in the right place, because this is a product that they could touch, feel, and see. That for me was a really, really big learning element to all of this that we're now deploying to our sales staff today to say, here are some tactics to figure out what type of person are you dealing with and how to progress from there. It's not that we ignore the person who's not ready to buy yet. It's just a different engagement strategy.
How did you, as you were going through that before, you talk about now equipping your sellers to better understand that. For you as an individual, and kind of the reason why I'm asking is because there are a lot of people who want to make that similar transition. Maybe it's not out of staffing per se, but out of something into software, right? And there are a lot of, candidly, revenue leaders who want their people that they're hiring to have relevant experience to some degree, right? I want people to have sold SaaS as an example, not somebody who have sold service. So I wanted to understand your journey in terms of how you were able to do that. So once you've understood, so you got to that point where you realized that it's a slower process, that there's a level of, call it qualification, that needs to happen so that you aren't ultimately just spinning your wheels, so to speak. So how did you learn it? Was it just trial and error? Was there somebody internally? Give me a sense of what that was for you.
So my number one learning style is definitely hands-on application or visual. I learn best by doing, but then I learn a very close second best by watching you do,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm sitting in with our sales staff when I'm brand new, and then even when I'm a year in, and even still today, 4 years in as the president, to say, how's this going? Because you could tell me how it's going all day, but I'm going to interpret it likely different than how you're telling me. If I watch you do it, I'm going to learn a lot more personally. So I learned about the buyer types mostly through doing, but then observing, and then also accessing my network. So I wanted to get into software because a lot of the guys that I'm hanging around with, golfing with, going to baseball games with my kids, they were in it. And they were describing to me their lifestyles. And I'm like, that's what I want. So getting into this path was really set by a work-life balance desire, let's say. And then I didn't forget about those people, and I still don't, because they're folks who I lean on all the time to say, how are you doing this? How are you marketing? What is your sales cycle looking like? Is it getting faster or slower with Chorus or Gong or any of these tools that you're using. So I guess to answer your question, I learned by doing, then I learned by watching, and then I learned by networking.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a copycat by nature. I used to joke, and I know I said this to you when we were talking, that I'll never be able to become president because all I do is copy other people's ideas and then put my twist on it and
Right.
then do it elsewhere. And I'm like, oh shoot, I can't say that anymore.
Right.
So now I just copy other people and make it my own. But
Yeah,
I think that there's some truth to that.
for sure. Absolutely. Other copy other presidents. Speaking of that, what have you learned now that you are the president that you just didn't appreciate before as CRO or other positions that you held?
Man, how long can we do this? So much. I mean, I'm a salesperson. I went to college at Indiana for business and marketing. So, I think I failed accounting, pretty sure. That side of the business, right? Like, how are we keeping the books? How are we deciding what to buy, what not to buy? How are we confirming that, adding servers to our tech stack is a smart move versus outsourcing and going into the cloud? How do you uh, decide which type of language to write your code in from a developmental perspective? I'm sitting in with our development team now every single day. And my first couple of weeks sitting in there, I was terrified. I felt like they were talking in a different language. I still feel that way. But what I'm learning is watching them make their decisions and how they prioritize is no different than anybody else. It's a cost and return matrix on what's the best use of our time and how do we go about getting there. So to your question about what do I appreciate what I've been learning, it's the exposure to all of these other pieces that help make the business run. When I was selling, all I had to do was learn how the product worked.
Mm-hmm.
And it does work and what service it's providing. Now I'm learning about what it takes to make it work, what it takes to run it.
It's very interesting. Let me just go back to and double down on this for a second. We talk about buying decisions or deciding to go with your own servers or to outsource it to the cloud. Like, what's the decision-making process between the two? Like, in other words, obviously I know there's the cost and expense are involved, but how are you doing that?
Oh man, this is awesome because it's exactly what I'm going through right now. So there's so many things that go into it.
Yeah.
Cost, of course, is a big one. Risk is a huge one. So if I'm outsourcing to a cloud, what are their security measures? What do my contracts say that I'm required to deliver from a security standpoint? Throw a term out to you, SOC 2. It's a certification that says we had some auditor come in here to say that our stuff is safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a piece of paper and it makes the buyer happy.
Right.
9 times out of 10, the buyer doesn't even know what the heck it means.
Right.
But if we outsource, we have to go through that whole validation process with them to make sure that they're secure and that they're living up to the standards that we've already promised our customers if it's a change in business strategy. So I look at it from an expense standpoint, a risk standpoint, and then the third that I look from is, I think the most important thing is a personnel standpoint. There's a difference in developing to on-prem versus developing to off-site or in the cloud. There's a difference in what your code has to say to go match a resume to a server that sits down the hall versus a server that sits on Amazon, let's say as an example, cloud, and how that all operates. So the world is heading towards cloud-based applications, right? If we keep doing everything on-prem, that skill set starts to become a luxury versus a necessity. I think I have that right. Maybe it's the other way around, but
backwards, but yeah.
you get my point.
Right.
So it's a personnel issue then too of building for the future. So it's those three things: expense, risk, and talent assessment, really.
When you first sat with the developers, as you just alluded to, or even right there when you just talked about SOC 2, I wonder, you know that now, and you're able to explain it articulately, and you understand it to the degree to which you understand it. But when you were learning it, and you talked earlier about you learn by doing, but you can't, but learning by doing something like deciding to go from server to cloud and instead of, making a mistake there, especially when risk is involved, is a little bit different than spending money on marketing. It has a whole different thing to it, right? So how, did you lean on other people internally? Were there, to your point about your network and other presidents that you perhaps know, to make sure that the information that you're consuming is the right information, right? You're actually looking to, find the right sources of the right information, right? And then also to finally make that ultimate decision so you can rest easy at night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So there's a lot to your question there. So one, how did I get to where I got to in terms of this specific space? Casey J. Cox was the one who introduced the two of us,
Yep.
right? Being curious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't understand. I'm not a guy who sits in a room who's like, shoot, I'm the president, I should probably know this.
Yeah.
If I'm searching the catalog index in my head of like a dictionary, or I'm going to the phone, I'm just blurting it out. Pause, I don't know what you're talking about. What does this mean? Why is this important? Why are we talking about it? So curiosity. Then what you talked about that I think is really, really important is, how do you know that you're making the right call? Because there's 100 ways in which you could go about writing code, storing the code, calling to the code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of like the $1 billion question. I don't think you ever know for sure. Cliche statements like death by analysis. I could sit and I could research all day, but eventually you just got to go. So it is networking. It is talking to others. It is asking for advice. It's getting exposed to this type of stuff, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that I've listened to the radio in probably 3 years, right? It's talking to and listening to people who are living in the space all the time, and then being curious, reaching out to them directly on LinkedIn to say, hey, I was really inspired by what you had to say here. Do you have time to talk to me more? I've almost never been told no, shut up, right?
Yep.
So stuff like that, I put that as part of my skills, my sales skills arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
That's just ingrained in me for what I've learned my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Ask, and ask again. And if I'm hitting on the wrong door, stop, eject, turn around, walk away. If I'm hitting on the right door, keep walking through. And that's really been the guide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does, for sure. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier that I forgot to follow up on. So forgive me, audience, if I'm just sort of zigzagging a little bit. But I want to talk about the equipping your sales team with being able to, ask the right questions or understand the buyer enough so that they aren't spinning their wheels. Is that something that you are building internally, or is it something where you're hiring a sales coach, consultant? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're building internally. So we use our own CRM that we created.
Okay.
So the beautiful part about that is, if I want to create more custom cards or more, questions that need to be asked and then answered and documented against, we can do it, and we can do it pretty fast. So it's pretty nice. So the spirit of your question, help me with. Are you asking, how do we learn the difference between kind of a passive buyer versus a buyer, or how do I train my staff to do that?
Yeah, the latter. How do you train your staff to do that?
So I think inherently salespeople, and maybe this is an incorrect bias, but salespeople set themselves up for no, 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 no. And then all of a sudden they get a nibble at a yes, and they are already doing the math on the commission check that's going into their bank account.
Okay.
So you got to slow that down a bit by saying, all right, what is the story telling us here? So through our CRM, we're building, we call them orders that need to be filled out. So it's an interview questionnaire essentially, but it's programmatic that it allows you to walk through it with them. So I'll give you an example. Someone reaches out to us saying they want a demonstration of our product. Wonderful. We're going to give it to you all day. But we've got to determine, is this worth all of our time, some of our time, none of our time? So what we're doing from an assessment standpoint there is I have some pretty negative belief systems that help guide me to where I want to go. At least they sound negative when I say them out loud. So please, audience, don't think I'm a cynical jerk. But I generally believe that most people set out in a good spirited approach to things. Like, no one's calling us just to waste our time, right? They're genuinely calling us to see what's going on. I do believe, however, that when they're calling us to reach out to find out what's going on, they're also not 100% serious about buying yet either. So I have to help them get there. And the way in which to get there is by behavior testing. We teach our sales team that if you're the first person that they're calling, it's not a bad thing, but you should be a little bit cautious when they tell you that they're for sure ready to buy. The cost of software is up to a tenth or a couple percentage points of their annual revenue. This isn't a cheap thing that you just go out and window shop and buy the next day. Like, you're going to do your homework, at least a savvy buyer does. So use the majority rule here to say a savvy buyer is going to vet the marketplace. If they're telling you that they're ready to buy, but they're only talking to you, that's likely an indication that they're not really ready to buy yet. Mm-hmm. And we've got to really call that out politely to make sure we don't ruin the relationship. But we've got to call that out to make sure that we're valuing our time and their time as we go through the process. Mm-hmm. So little things like that. So we've built that questionnaire in our system to help remind the salesperson, don't start counting your chickens yet because they haven't hatched.
Got it. Yep. And then, of course, reinforcing that behavior, right? It's not just enough to be sitting in the CRM and have a prescriptive question, but right. All right. I got to ask the next natural question there, which is that how do you go about reinforcing that behavior?
So we have, I think, biased, of course, very, very good salespeople and very good sales leaders. So we go through pipeline reviews every other week. Where are we at? Just like most organizations, 90 plus, 60 to 90, 30 to 60, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're watching the deal progress through and they're reviewing the pipeline. So our sales leaders and teams are sitting there saying, okay, where are we at? How is this going? What do you need to do? What do you need from me? Do we need escalations? Do we need to get vendors involved? How are we getting this thing across the finish line? So it's just a constant strategy review. What I really like about our setup is we have teams. So you're defined a sales territory. Within your sales territory, we have a BDR, business development rep. We have an outside salesperson, a senior sales manager, and then we have a sales engineer who's responsible for demoing and getting into the technical nitty gritty, depending upon the buyer. The way that structure is set up is defined to be accountability partners. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the sales manager's job or the director of sales job to make sure that you're getting the answers filled out in your CRM and that you're walking the dog. It's the sales engineer saying, I really don't want to do a demo here if they're not ready to go. It's the BDR saying, I got them on the phone. They're interested. Here's where this goes. Now we're developing the BDR and helping that person get into that next stage. It's accountability and partnership at every level is the idea.
Got it. Tell me about the future as you see it, right? Like, what's the vision as you look out, and you can even give me the time frame that you are looking out, and then how do you make that vision strategically become a reality as you sort of walk through it?
Okay, so high level, we are growing rapidly as a company. We're slightly ahead of pace in comparison to our industry, so our biggest competitors. Um, but we're all growing, and we're all growing fast. There's tons of pressure in the marketplace around something called digital recruiting. If you've heard of this, it's everyone wants AI, everyone wants automation, right? So, how do we take a candidate through a process without a human being ever having to talk to them so that I could have less staff deployed, I could have more engagement with a candidate, and I can get a candidate to a customer faster?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we're all kind of developing this in our own way that we see fit within our own industry. I think that that's going to continue to be a trend. I don't think you could take human beings out of recruitment. I don't think you could take human beings out of sales. I don't think you could take humans out of the human relationship management. Um, you could supplement and you could add with some automation. So high level, I think it's partly that big drilled down, you know, approach level for where is TempWorks going is we want to keep leading and disrupting in our space. And we do that best by working with our customers. And that whole story that I told you about my sales approach of we don't have this yet. We are interested in building it. Are you willing to help us go there? And instead of just doing it for one customer, we try and survey and canvas a group and say, what collective problem are we trying to solve here? And how can technology be utilized to solve that problem? I'll give you an example. Everyone knows that the economy is kind of on its way down, right? Economists are reporting that technically we were already in a recession last year since GDP had 2 consecutive quarters of drop. No one felt it really or saw it. Certain industries and certain arenas did, but it wasn't the way it should be, at least as it says on paper. Well, interest rates continue to go up while inflation keeps going up. Hiring is down based on the numbers that we're seeing. So, yeah, something is coming. Every 5 to 10 years, you see the employee market shift from an employee driven market, which means you and I can go to any company and say, I know I'm worth $10 an hour, but since you can't find anybody, you got to pay me 15.
Right.
And in a year or so, it's going to shift to say, hey, buddy, you want to keep this job, you got to go back to $10 an hour. And that's just how it works. Well, when we go to that, the desire for candidate engagement, of course, still exists, but the desire for sales engagement becomes more and more prevalent. So how do we get to more companies who need to use staffing? How do we get to the right companies who need to use staffing? How do we get to the right people within those companies to use staffing? So now we're playing with that automation idea to engage in that space and what that looks like. So just as a general concept and an idea, we have to be ahead of the curve and we have to get it out so that it's a usable tool before that situation happens. So where we're going is trying to continue to be a disruptor with that mindset. We have ideas on like different industries to explore. We're in staffing. Do we want to go to whatever else? We're constantly playing around with that. But the general idea is exactly what I just outlined.
Seems to me like based on what you just described there as it pertains to, I'm not even sure if I think you used this word, but innovation is, seems to me like innovation, at least internally for you, comes from the customers, right? In other words, talking to customers and understanding what their real and present challenges are helps inform you and your team to say, okay, this is something that we need to create. It doesn't exist right now, but given that our capability, right, our personnel, and then the technology that already exists, we can build something that solves a problem for this group of customers. And if it solves a problem for this group of customers, we could probably, at least from a vision perspective, we can go and look to see other customers that look like these folks and bring it to them too as well. Is that part of it?
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, I can't remember if it was yours or Kaplan's. It was a sales podcast for
Mm-hmm.
sure that I was listening to, and the guest was talking about there aren't really many inventions now that are new.
Mm-hmm.
Like the refrigerator was a new invention. Now it's just how do you refrigerate faster, longer, better with less energy, right?
Yep.
And I tend to agree with that. We're not looking at inventing something that doesn't exist today. If that idea comes about, of course, we're going to try and roll it out and make some money off of it and help the industry. But we're really looking at enhancing what's already there or helping cultivate things that don't exist today. So yes, it's innovation, but it's innovation with the market in mind.
Yeah.
You know, we could build something or design something that is unbelievably advanced, but if the market's not ready for it, is it really worth it?
You know, I think we just found something here, which is the difference between creativity and innovation, which creativity is the former. It's creating something that maybe the market doesn't even care about. It's just sort of, hey, there's my creation, kind of like a painting or something. But innovation, I believe, is something more collaborative. It's something that, you know, is built together through.
I subscribe to that.
What's that? Say that again.
I subscribe to that as
Yeah.
well. I do.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And my owners may be like, dude, you can't talk about we don't invent stuff. We're a software creator. It's like the out of air, random, like, you know, we're not. Hey, newsflash: TempWorks is not going to be the creators of teleportation. Okay?
They're not. Oh no. Listen,
No, that's not going to be us.
I'll edit that out before it gets to too many people. All right. Well, let them think otherwise. So, one other thing I want to hit on here before we get to the rapid fire 5, which is, what about velocity in all of this, right? In other words, because to your point, right, you have competitors that are talking to their customers and innovating as well and coming up with the same thing.
Yeah.
And one thing you didn't mention that I'll throw out there anyways, of course, and you talked about a little bit in terms of AI, but Chat GPT and the advent of that and sort of where this fits in all that. Because I feel like people who are able to adapt and adopt that into their own technologies, and believe me, I got to use this one example, this anecdote for anybody that sells out there and you're trying to find product market fit. I was going to post about this at some point recently, which is I got a cold email on a Saturday morning that I feel like I've been personally waiting for this cold email for the last 3 years. Like, and how many people can sit and say that they were waiting for a cold email? I was. And here's why. I have this podcast, of course. A big pain for me is when I'm done with the podcast. There was a lot of pains that was associated with this podcast, to be honest with you, that I've eliminated. The only fun part about the podcast is this. Everything else around it sucks. But the pain that I had was once you and I hit end, I'm going to take the recording, I'll put it all together, and then I'm going to publish it, and I want people to see it and hear it and appreciate it, right? And those coming up with the title, coming up with the show notes, come up with the LinkedIn post, and come up with any other way to communicate to the world that I just had this fantastic guest on is time consuming, and it takes a lot of brain energy, okay? And I usually do that on Sunday morning because Saturday I take off.
And it matters, right?
And it matters.
The wrong title gets you no listeners.
That's the thing, right? And so I usually will spend 3 hours on a Sunday morning just doing all of that and just getting it all out, right? And then I hired someone that helps me do all that, right? So writes the titles, the subject, all that stuff. Fantastic, right? And we even use Chat GPT to help us take all of I literally say, like, write a summary for this interview, right? Essentially, right? But even that was clunky because we have to copy and paste the transcript, put it in there. Chat GPT didn't like all of the these are long episodes, right? So it was too many words in there. And all of a sudden I get this email on a Saturday morning, and the email was perfect. It was probably no longer than like 3 sentences. And it was just something like, we have this tool that will help you write your subject lines, summarize the episodes, write your LinkedIn or your social posts and all that. And it just sort of through generative AI or something like that, right? And obviously, I've been experiencing Chat GPT and looking at all things generative AI. I've already in my mind been thinking, where is this thing coming to either Zoom, Otter, somewhere where one of these smart people are going to integrate ChatGPT. And I've been waiting for Copilot for the longest time too. Like I don't have access to it and I want Copilot. Nothing is there for me. Yeah. So when I got that email, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it, right? This is the thing. It took me as much time as for me to get out of my office, walk downstairs, get my wallet, bring it back up here, and pay for it. I did it. It's like $30 a month, and it's an absolute game changer, right? A straight up game changer. And it was just a cold email. And now I listen to this guy's podcast. I follow him on Twitter. He just frankly built this thing probably in his basement over the last couple of months, and it's fantastic. I'll give him a shout out. It's called Pod Squeeze. It's just fantastic. So, anyways, my point in saying all that,
$5 a month discount. Shout out. Yeah.
Exactly. Listen, I'll advertise him for free on this podcast. I just love it so much.
Awesome.
And so the thing is that when we talk about velocity, right, in his go-to-market strategy, 33% of his customers are coming from cold emails, by the way, of course, right? But when we talk about velocity and so many people are trying to figure it out, and he's absolutely figured it out and he got to me, how are you able to, once you talk to your customers, what's the plan for going fast but not in a hurry, I guess, to make sure that it's done right and that you win?
That's all part of the assessment. So one, that story is super cool and very, very relevant for what's going on. Are you going to be using ChatGPT, AI, other forums? I mean, there's tons of them, right? AutoGPT is going to be the big disruptor here soon, and OpenAI and all that kind of stuff. Are you using it as a tool? Are you burying your head in the sand and hoping that it goes away? Are you terrified of it? Like, what is it? What is it?
Yeah.
To me, it's a tool. It's a resource that's being able to be deployed to help you go a little bit faster. So to your big question, what do we do about velocity or speed? It's all part of the equation. It's all part of the roadmap prioritization. If we were looking at this impending employee-driven market to shift to an employer-driven market starting today, and we needed to do something to make sure that it hits by Q1 of next year, let's say, which is when it comes, odds of us building it and building it right in that time frame and then being able to sell it ain't happening, right? That's a part of the equation that says, are we ahead of this, aware of this enough, early enough, depending on the size of the feature and the length of building, and are we ready to go adopt it? So that's part of the do we or don't we, decision matrix to go build right out of the gate. However, we can't always be building at the pace that we were building in 2007, right? I mean, airplanes get us to places faster, trains get us to places faster. The silly refrigerator example that I gave earlier freezes things faster and for longer. There's constant improvement. And the way that improvement goes is by upskilling your staff. That talent upskill piece is critical. I always love sharing this one. It's from Shawshank. Andy Dufresne says at the end of the movie, you get busy living or you get busy dying. If you stop learning, if you stop developing, if you stop adding tools to your tool belt, you're toast. Conversely, if you're constantly adding and you're constantly exploring and you're constantly networking, you're reading, you're listening to podcasts, you're trying to add new things to your tool belt, you're putting them in play and you're actually working on it, right? Instead of doing one day of yoga and quitting like I did, you actually work on it. Now you're going to have a tool that's useful that you know how to take advantage of. And if we deploy that time to get that feature live goes from a year or a month to half a year or maybe 2 weeks, and that's a part of the equation too.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. One thing that came to mind that I always used to say as you were giving that example is, if you rest, you rust. And if
Love it.
Yeah,
man, so much better.
Yep. Yeah. If you rest, you rust.
Write that one down.
So let's get into the rapid fire 5 in the time that we have left, if you're ready for a little bit of fun here.
Yeah, please. Looking forward to this.
All right. First question. What motivates you?
Family. Pretty easy one for me. I'm one of 7 kids. Grew up in Chicago. My parents did everything for us. I'm not one of those like sad tales that shaped my life. I'm one of those. I have infinite amount of role models around me, and I learned how to do it the right way, at least in my opinion. I'm a father of three, and that's it.
I
Do
love
what we
that.
can. Make sure we're putting food on the table for them. That's my job.
Love it. Love it. Number two, name a big goal you have right now, and when would you like to accomplish it?
Personally or professionally?
Uh, Personally, why don't we go personally?
Um, I'd like to get back into running and general sports play. I golf, which is wonderful, but as a big time baseball player, at least what I like to think I was, I miss that competing level.
Mm,
Casual weekend golf just doesn't cut it.
mm.
So I need to find something to get those competitive urges out. Jay and I were talking about yoga beforehand, just something to challenge my body and my brain. I have to get back on the docket. I don't care if it's men's league softball, if it's running in Spartan races or mud races. I got to get something going.
Yeah, one of the things too about yoga that I like is that it gets to a point where it's so challenging where you really legitimately forget about your other challenges in that moment. You know?
That's amazing.
Yeah, just
So
yeah, it just clears your mind. It's fantastic. What's your most preferred way to learn new information?
we talked about this a little bit earlier. I like to get my hands dirty. I like to get on it. If that's not readily available, I like watching and observing. I find that I learn a lot by watching others fall down or succeed. Um, so those would be the two big ones. Reading, of course, I try and read a book a month at least, but I'd rather hands on or watch.
I'm the most impatient reader because I'll read like the first chapter and then I'll want to go and try whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like I got
Yeah,
it, right? I got to go do it, right? I'm like you. I'm a doer, right? Like,
or you're highlighting and you go and you open the book and it's like I didn't highlight one sentence in the entire book. Like what did I do here?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
totally.
so true. So true. How many hours of sleep do you average per night?
Mind you, I have a 3 month old. Everybody at home, so not a lot. I actually never really been a big sleeper. I'm like 5 6 hours probably max a night. I'll stay up and watch West Coast sports and then get up at 6 in the morning at the latest.
You sound a lot like me, except I don't have a 3 month old, but yeah, I just can't stay in bed and I can't go to bed. I'm like midnight to 5:30 or 6. It's crazy.
Yeah. What do they say? People are like either night owls or early risers. Like,
Yeah,
what are you if you're both?
I know exactly. Practically nocturnal. Oh, I don't even know what that would be. I have no idea. Crazy.
Like,
Tired is what it is.
you're tired. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Question number 5. What's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working?
Spending time with family for sure. Watching my kiddos, learn how to ride a bike. My 5-year-old just mastered that the other day, and his face was well worth it. If it's not that, and I'm being selfish, out on the golf course.
I love it. That bike riding thing resonates. When my daughter learned when she was 5, we had videos, as I'm sure you do, of her riding her tricycle, of her riding, I'm holding the back of her seat while she's riding without it. And then eventually she goes. And I remember, because I'm such a visual person and I like creating, I created a mashup of each little step. So trying, yeah. And then I added the Rocky music, Gonna Fly Now, to it, right?
That's awesome.
It's so cool.
Oh man, I'm such a bad dad. I gotta figure out how to do that now.
Oh,
That's
no, I'm even worse because I didn't do it for my son. I feel like I still need to go back and get those videos so I can put it together for him. He did it actually sooner, so it was like a little different.
you just said he got his first communion, right? You
Yeah,
got some. You're fine.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Here is a bonus question, which is comes from another guest that I had on. So the bonus question that they asked is, why do you do what you do? What's your why, essentially, as far as what you do?
Yeah. So my personal was family. my professional is I really believe in pay it forward. We have a mantra here at TempWorks that you want to get promoted, you want to move to the next level, you of course have to excel in your job. You got to be able to tell a story about how somebody is better because you're around.
Mm.
And I think that that's so important. I spoke highly of Aerotech. I worked there for 12 years. I really strongly believe that I wouldn't be where I'm at today without that experience, because I got to work with so many great people who took the time to explain to me how I was coming off, or how I wasn't, or what's best to do in these certain situations. So, helping someone get through some of their tough times in an employment standpoint only,
Mm.
uh, I think is a big why for me at work every single day. You can take that down to the personal level of helping them accomplish their own personal whys. But just like seeing my son's face when he rides that bike, seeing an employee's face close a deal when they thought they never could
Mm.
because they employed some of the skill sets or tactics that we taught them is all worldly to me.
It's fantastic. Think about a question that you would like to ask, or for me to ask the next guest. It can be professional, it can be personal, it could be anything you want it to be.
So I like your question about learning. One that I'm constantly curious about is professional networking.
Hmm.
I'd like to know, from the next guest, like, are you a part of a group that you're paying for, or just that you're regularly meeting with beyond the informal mentorship? I don't know about you, Jay, but I get like a cold email about this 5 times a week. It feels like join this circle, join that circle. It's only $1,000 a month. It's only, and may turn a lot of people off. Like it's lonely at top is a cliche statement. It is like, who are my peers? Who can I go learn from? What does that look like?
Hmm.
So I'm genuinely curious if people are using networking groups, and what those look like.
Are you part of a networking group, and what does that look like for you? What kind of experience are you getting out of it? Fabulous. And just to wrap up, how can folks say thank you, reach out to you, maybe ask a question I didn't ask? Perhaps maybe they're in staffing and they want to learn a little bit more about TempWorks.
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely the best way. And please, anybody and everybody, reach out. Brett Cavanagh, I'm sure you'll put it in your notes, but not to be confused with Supreme Court Justice Brett Cavanagh. That guy spells with a K and a U.
That's right.
I'm a C and no U. So, yeah, LinkedIn's the best way to go.
Absolutely. Brett Cavanagh with a C and no U. And I'm glad to know you.
Likewise.
Thank you for joining the Growth.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Goodbye, everybody. Cue in the music.